Good afternoon. I'm Yamiche Alcindor in Washington, D.C., and welcome to this MSNBC special, Decision 2024, The Deciders. In just over 72 hours, polls will start closing in this presidential election. And right now, the candidates are out making two very different closing arguments. This race, of course, will all come down to the critical battleground states and a handful of decider counties MSNBC has been following throughout the election cycle. We'll be looking at those in this special hour, plus this. What do you think your mother would be telling you in these final days before this election against Donald Trump?
Just go beat him. That's probably what she'd say. Yeah, that's my mother.
My one-on-one interview with Vice President Kamala Harris from the campaign trail coming up. Now we begin with a very busy campaign trail with a flurry of events that we're following. The next hour or so, voters are expected to hear from both presidential candidates and both vice presidential candidates. Former President Donald Trump is set to speak any moment now in Salem, Virginia. Vice President Kamala Harris will be at a rally in Charlotte, North Carolina coming up soon. As for the VP candidates, well, they're holding dueling rallies this hour in the swing state of Arizona. Governor Tim Walz will be in Flagstaff and Senator J.D. Vance will be in Scottsdale. Earlier today, President Biden paid a visit to his hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania in support of VP Harris. And if that's not enough, we're also monitoring a We Won't Go Back Women's March in Washington, D.C. at this hour. We have a team of reporters at the ready covering all the angles for you this afternoon as we inch closer and closer to Election Day. Let's begin with NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. He's in Charlotte, North Carolina, where Vice President Harris will be speaking soon. So, Gabe, thanks for being here. I have to ask you, what do you think is at the heart of the Harris campaign's closing message here? They're doing a lot, but what do you think is really the beating heart of this?
Hi there, Yamiche. Well, look, she's really trying to go after those moderate Republicans and swing state voters. Small sliver of the electorate that she feels can really put her over the top in key states, just like North Carolina. Look, right behind me is Governor Roy Cooper. Before that, Kerry Washington. We're expecting John Bon Jovi at this rally, really trying to ramp up the excitement here on the last day of in-person early voting. And just a couple hours ago, we were at a polling place not far from here. Long lines there. So the Harris campaign does believe that that plays in their favor. They feel that they're getting a lot of early vote, that a lot of women are voting as well. And senior campaign officials believe that Donald Trump is worried because he's coming to North Carolina so often. Now, earlier today, as you mentioned, Yamiche, Vice President Harris was in another southern battleground, Georgia. Take a listen to how she distilled her closing message to the audience there.
Just imagine if he is elected on day one, Donald Trump would walk in that Oval Office with his enemies list, stewing over an enemies list. When I am elected, I will walk in on your behalf with my to-do list. My to-do list.
And Yamiche, that is something that we have heard over and over again from the vice president, as you know, over the last several weeks, that Donald Trump has an enemies list. She has a to-do list. And on day one, she will work with Republicans. And again, that message that she's trying to appeal to those moderate voters that can be critical in a state like this, Yamiche.
That's certainly true, and her campaign officials are telling us, reporters, that they believe people still can be swayed. So interesting to hear them say that, interesting to hear you talk about that latest reporting. Thank you so much, Gabe. Now turning to former President Donald Trump. He is campaigning in Virginia following a stop in battleground North Carolina. Joining us from the ground from Salem, Virginia is NBC News reporter Gary Grumbach. So Gary, you know, this is of course a special, we're focusing on battlegrounds. Virginia is certainly not considered a battleground state. Why then is the former president spending his time campaigning there with just 3 days to go before Election Day? What's the strategy here?
Yeah, that's not just a question we're asking, Amish. That's a question that the folks here, his supporters, are actually asking from those I've talked to earlier this afternoon. They're, of course, thrilled and excited to see him here in Virginia, but they are curious as to why he's not perhaps spending a little more time in some of the battleground states. The Trump campaign says their thinking is twofold. One, it's about expanding the map, right? He was in New Mexico not too long ago. He was in New York for that big Madison Square Garden rally, and he's here in Virginia today. So it's all about trying to expand the map where he can, especially for some of these House and Senate, those down ballot races. The second thought here is the idea of election security, of course, being a huge topic Donald Trump loves to talk about on the campaign trail. And it's a big week here in Virginia for election security for two reasons. One, because of the Supreme Court ruling on voter rolls that overturned two lower court rulings earlier this week, and also what the DOJ did yesterday, which was announced that 6 cities in the Commonwealth of Virginia will have DOJ poll watchers in their vicinity, making sure things are up to snuff according to DOJ standards. Of course, this is something that Republicans and Democrats do with poll watchers. DOJ now doing that as well. Yamish.
It's really interesting, and Harris campaign officials say that there have already been some legal back and forth in some of the swing states. So thank you so much, Gary, for that reporting. Next, we head to another swing state, or I should say a swing state, because Virginia was not one, that being North Carolina. Just about an hour ago, early in-person voting has ended there. And on this final Saturday of this election cycle, both candidates spent time there today. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton is there in Raleigh, North Carolina for us. Antonia, this is a state that you know well. You've done a lot of stories, a lot of great stories there. And today there were very long lines there as people were casting their ballots. What did you hear from folks?
Well, Yamish, as you hopefully can see behind me here, early voting came to an end across the state more than an hour ago now, but people are still in line, waiting very patiently, in some cases up to 2 hours today, just to be able to cast their vote. Some of that is excitement, though, and then some of that it's nerves. I've spoken to voters over the last few days who have talked about immense anxiety. I mean, the race here is incredibly tight. People have been describing it as a jump ball, but especially after Hurricane Helene, there's been a lot of mis and disinformation in this state and claims about non-citizens trying to vote, something that election officials tell us is basically non-existent and a complete and outright lie. But the Harris campaign has had to invest in having election law experts and voter protection experts in all 13 of their field offices in order to respond to voter confusion and concerns and make sure that people feel safe as they head to the polls and then monitor what's going to happen on Tuesday. Take a listen to a conversation that I had with one voter who was feeling a little nervous this morning.
I think there's a little bit of fear here. I think people are nervous. I don't feel like this is an exciting election. I think that it's driven a lot by polarization more than excitement for a particular candidate, which is unfortunate. But I think it's good that people care and that they're coming out in large numbers to show that and to get the kind of government that they want in place.
And for Harris to pull this thing off, she needs people in communities like this one to be coming out in droves. She is looking for black voters in this part of the state. She is looking for young voters, many of them college-aged, people who live in the Raleigh area. That's where she really needs to run up the score. Certainly today, when they're going to get a look at the early numbers from today, but then again on Tuesday. So to them, this kind of line, this kind of energy, that is a very good sign. And, you know, because this is a state with those moderate voters, with a lot of unaffiliated people who kind of split their ticket, move one way or the other, depending on what cycle they're in, they think they're going to win over a lot of those people in the middle in the late stage. I actually went canvassing the other day and met one of those late stage breakers who told me that she ended up taking a look at Project 2025, and that's what made up her mind in these last couple days. And that's what they think could make the difference and could make history here in just a couple days, Yamish.
Yeah, and if she were to pull off winning in North Carolina, it would be a big deal because the last Democrat to win was Barack Obama in 2008, and then it had been decades before that. So it's definitely interesting to hear what's going on in North Carolina. Thank you so much, Antonia Hilton, for your reporting. And coming up, as we monitor all the live events going on this hour, my one-on-one interview with Vice President Kamala Harris. We talked about what keeps her up at night, and she's not the only one who is anxious.
I'm very anxious.
It's pretty nerve-wracking. I'm not sleeping real well at night right now.
I just wake up every day with a pit in my stomach.
hour, Vice President Harris is holding a rally in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the vice presidential candidates are holding dueling events in Arizona. Tim Walz in Flagstaff and J.D. Vance coming up in Scottsdale. The Harris campaign is also making its final pitch on the airwaves, releasing a new ad just a few hours ago. Here's some of that ad highlighting parts of her closing argument.
Throughout this campaign, I've seen the best of America, and I've seen what is holding you back and weighing you down. High costs, fundamental rights taken away, and politics that have driven fear and division. You deserve better. As president, I'll bring a new generation of leadership. I'll take on price gouging and bring down the cost of groceries and housing and prescriptions. I'll fight for your freedom to make your own choices.
And this week, I caught up with Vice President Kamala Harris as she campaigned in battleground Arizona. Here's our one-on-one conversation. What concerns you most when you think about how close this election is and these key swing states that you need to win?
It is my responsibility to be everywhere I can to talk directly with voters and talk with them about the issues that are at stake in this election so that I can earn their vote. And so that's why I'm here today in Arizona, why yesterday I was in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and I'm going to be all over the country pretty much, especially in the swing states, talking with folks about the issues that relate to them and the contrast between me and Donald Trump.
Former First Lady Michelle Obama says she stays up at night wondering why this election is so close. Do you do that? What keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night are the challenges that face the American family and my role and responsibility in my to-do list to address those issues, whether it be on bringing down the cost of groceries, bringing down the cost of housing, what we need to do to make sure childcare is affordable for working families, what I will do to make sure that Medicare covers in-home care for seniors. Those are the things that keep me up, which is doing the work that will directly impact the people of America. And this, again, is a big contrast between me and Donald Trump. He spends full time talking about himself, his personal grievances, his enemies list. On day one, I will walk into the Oval Office with my to-do list, which is about helping the American people deal with their challenges and also tap into their ambitions and dreams.
Former President Donald Trump has said that he would be a protector of women, whether they like it or not. What do you make of that, and how does that contrast with your views on women and their rights and needs?
Well, I'll just speak on behalf of myself, but also the Americans that I speak with every day around our country, regardless of their gender, which is the majority of Americans believe that women are intelligent enough and should have and be respected for their agency to make decisions for themselves about what is in their best interest and not have their government, and certainly not Donald Trump, telling them what to do. And his latest comment is just the most recent in a series of examples that we have seen from him in his words and deeds about how he devalues the ability of women to have the choice and the freedom to make decisions about their own body.
Former President Trump also rode around in a garbage truck to call attention to President Biden's comments about his supporters and their rhetoric. Are you concerned that President Biden's comments might undermine your own messaging that you want to be a president for all Americans?
Well, I've addressed how I feel about those comments. One, that the president explained what he meant, but two, I do not believe, and I will speak for myself, that we should ever criticize people based on who they vote for. But let's understand again where we are in this election. On the one hand, you have Donald Trump, who refers to people by the most demeaning words, who attempts to really take from them the dignity that they so rightly deserve. He is someone who talks full time about the enemy within. He speaks ill of America. He refers to us as a garbage can. And he does not understand that most people are exhausted with his rhetoric, exhausted with that approach, exhausted with an approach that Donald Trump has that's trying to divide our country and have Americans point fingers at each other. They're done with it, and they're ready to turn the page and accept and receive a new generation of leadership, which I offer.
As he and his supporters grab onto that language, though, from President Biden, you're not at all concerned that that might undermine your messaging?
I am very clear that in this election, what the American people want most is to to know that I have a plan, that we have a plan to bring down the cost of living and invest in American families, invest in small businesses, invest in our economy. I am proud that I have the support of leading economists in our nation who recognize that I actually have a specific plan and that it will strengthen America's economy. He has very little of a plan besides giving tax breaks to the richest people, and his plan, whatever it may be, will actually weaken our economy.
I've talked to Americans from all across this country in all walks of life who are inspired by your story. What's your message to them as they are looking at your journey, especially the history that you are making and might make as the first Black woman and Indian woman to break down this glass ceiling? And even now, of course, making the history that you're making now.
Well, you know, you've probably heard me say many times, my mother said to me, Kamala, you may be the first to do many things, make sure you're not the last. And what I see in the people who are coming to rallies such as this are, you know, young men, young women, people of every age, every background, every race, who are excited about the possibility of a new generation of leadership and excited about the fact that they have a choice to have a president of the United States who actually sees them, gets them, and wants to do the hard work that is about improving their life.
Day one, what's your first executive action?
Well, my first priority, which will be probably the package of bills, is about bringing down the cost of living. So it's about housing, it's about childcare, it's about what we need to do to deal with grocery prices. So it's not one, it's a package that is with one singular purpose, bringing down the cost of living.
We have to go, but you talk about your mother, and what do you think your mother would be telling you in these final days before this election against Donald Trump?
Just go beat him. That's probably what she'd say.
And joining me now is Eugene Daniels, White House correspondent with Politico and a co-author of Politico Playbook. So, Eugene, I was really honored to get that interview. And really, it's important because she's now in just the last few days of this election, and she's really hammering out and getting clearer about what she wants to do. Near the end of my interview with her, I asked her about what she wanted to do on day one. What have you heard about her priorities?
Yeah, you know, what was interesting is we've all been wondering that for a long time. What does that day one look like, right? Dana Bash asked her in that first interview after she became the top of the ticket. And you were able to get out of her the kind of the most detail that any of us who've been interviewing her over the last few months have been able to do. I mean, I think that focus on a package of bills, still not very specific, but that we're bringing down the costs for American families, that works well, right? Voters want to hear that because the economy continues across the spectrum, whether it's Democrats, Independents, Republicans, young, old, white, black, brown, like it does not matter, male, female, everyone is worried about the cost of living in this country. And so that a concept of some kind of package of bills is exactly what voters want to be hearing right now. And then using it as a chance to attack Donald Trump, who, you know, is sometimes not big on a lot of policy prescriptions.
That's one way to put it. He has concepts of plans, he says, when it comes to health care. But I want to ask you, Eugene, in her closing message, the vice president has been trying to balance attacking Donald Trump as dangerous and talking about her positive vision for the future. Meanwhile, former President Trump has been making headlines with his garbage comments, the comedian, of course, being at that rally in Madison Square Garden, but also the violent rhetoric that came out of Donald Trump's own mouth when he talked about former Congresswoman Liz Cheney and rifles. What do you make of how these closing messages are landing with voters?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Donald Trump, his closing message is landing with who he wanted to, which is the people who are most likely to be interested in him anyway, his base of support, and more specifically, if he's trying to expand it or double down on that base of support, also men and young men, right? This is something that he believes speaks to them in some way, right? Talking tough, seeming tough, all of those kinds of things. But when you do talk to kind of independent voters, some of the voters that are going to make the decision really about this election, you get a mixed bag, right? Some voters think that it's fine. Many others, especially women who consider themselves independents or moderate Republicans even, that it turns them off, right? It is not something that they want to hear out of a presidential candidate, and definitely not out of the person who could be the president again. And I think, you know, it is a risky move for the Trump campaign, but they feel strongly that it's going to work out, and it's worked out in the past. So I mean, it could work out again on Tuesday.
And Eugene, talking about strong feelings, senior Harris campaign officials are sounding really strong about the idea that they feel like they're winning. They said Vice President Harris is winning by double digits. Voters who are deciding who to support in this last week. What are you hearing about how the Harris campaign feels about the state of this race?
Yeah, kind of the same thing, right? Behind the scenes, they're saying that they feel good about where the early vote is. I will say I talked to some experts on our political podcast recently who said we shouldn't pay too much attention to the early vote because Tuesday is a big day. But they feel good about it. I will also say there is angst, right? Like, these are Democrats, right? This is a very angsty party. They're always worried about another shoe that could be dropping. Did they do enough? And so there's a lot of people out in the road this weekend trying to make sure that doesn't end up happening, that they don't end up with another 2016. But they do feel confident about where they are. But it's about the next few days bringing it all the way home and whether or not they can make that happen.
Well, thank you so much, Eugene, for breaking all this down in this last time. Now we have some breaking news here that John Bon Jovi is performing at this Harris rally in Charlotte, North Carolina. So let's listen in.
Doesn't make a difference if we make it or not. We got each other, and that's a lot for love. We give it a shot, and oh, if we fail,
Republicans turn out in 2020, and we're aiming to have that number even higher in 2024.
Polls show the race is close across the Sun Belt. Democrats hope to energize the electorate that helped Obama win here in North Carolina back in 2008, the only time a Dem candidate carried the state in the last 44 years. The black population here makes up more than 20% of the state. In Georgia, it's more than 30%. And about 3 out of 10 people in Arizona and Nevada are Hispanic. With those numbers in mind, some of Wade Wynn's funding is paying canvassers.
Kornacki is at the big board.
Like
Let's look at that race for 270. Rachel Maddow and our Decision 2024 team will provide insight as a result.
On Thursday, we can have another conversation.
Welcome back. I'm Yami Shalsundar, and that was me reporting on some canvassers in North Carolina. That's, of course, one of the swing states and swing counties we're watching this hour. Now, we've got reporters in several key battleground states right now. We'll start in Wisconsin, where both Vice President Harris and former President Trump kicked off a busy weekend last night with dueling rallies just miles apart. NBC News correspondent Maura Barrett is in Green Bay, Wisconsin, with reaction from people who are voting early. So, Maura, thanks for being here. What are you hearing from people there, given the fact that people are voting?
Yamiche, this area is the swingiest of swingy counties in a very tight battleground race. People's issues that they're looking at range from the economy, immigration, healthcare, and they all feel very strongly about all of these issues, but on really far opposing sides. I'm going to hear from a couple of voters that I met today, the first voting for Kamala Harris, the second voting for Trump, to give you some insight on their mindsets.
I think the perspective on, immigration and like deportation stuff kind of makes me a little angry. The way that people treat them as if like they don't belong here stuff, I don't agree with it, to be honest.
We all know what's true. We live this life. We're living with these high costs of living. We're living with the murders. We're living with everything that's been happening in the last 4 years. We know why it's happening. We don't need people out there yelling at us and telling us, oh, you're just a bunch of garbage if you don't vote for us. No, that's not right.
I also met a man here today, Jared, who didn't vote in 2016. He voted for President Biden in 2020, but is disappointed with foreign policy and the wars. And he says that he and his co-workers, who are all construction workers, are planning on voting for former President Trump this cycle. And so it's that turnover, that change of mindset that is really interesting to watch here in Brown County and these suburban counties around Green Bay. It used to be a Republican stronghold, but the Democrats have really chipped away, both in this region of the suburbs and down by Milwaukee. And so that's why a place like this is also something that we're looking at in terms of the Senate race, being the potential around a split ticket race. There's immense support for Democrat Tammy Baldwin. She's always been very popular here, but her race has gotten very tight as well. And so it's an interesting look at the way people are deciding to support these candidates. I've had a Democratic strategist point out that they see a real possibility that Baldwin could do really well, and Harris comes up short behind her, and others have said the opposite. So ultimately, the campaigns are aware of how tight this race is, pointing to the need to capitalize on these last few days to organize, get out door knocking, and elevate their ground game, because it really can come down to just a couple thousand votes here in Wisconsin, Yamiche.
Certainly can come down to just a couple thousand votes. And it's really interesting to hear the passion from those voters as you're talking to them on both sides of the aisle there. It tells you why this is a swingy state in a swing county. So thank you so much, Maura. And now, of course, we're heading south from Wisconsin to another crucial swing state, and that being Arizona. That's where we find Bram Resnick. He's a political reporter with our affiliate KPNX. Now, Bram, it's so great to see you, because I know sometimes I email you saying, what's going on in Arizona in the legislature right now? So I appreciate you being on here. So millions of ballots have been already cast in Arizona. How does this turnout break down so far?
Well, we estimate, according to Uplift Campaigns, that about 2/3 of all ballots, the projected total ballots, have been returned already. Republicans have a 41% share, just checking my numbers, have a 41% share of all ballots returned. Democrats, 32%, independents, 26%. So Democrats also face a kind of structural disadvantage. The number of registered voters proportionately is down from 2020, when Joe Biden won a very close race. So that's a big challenge for them. Democrats cannot win here without independent voters and also peeling off Republicans. That's their challenge right now.
And it's interesting when you talk about the registration. 4 years ago, President Biden beat former President Donald Trump in Arizona by just over 10,000 votes. You can fit those people in a stadium. What do the Trump and Harris strategies look like now on the ground as they're trying to get every vote possible?
The Trump strategy for a while now has been to just go after any registered Republican, low proficiency voters in particular, to run up the score, as they like to say. Democrats relying on their high energy, a lot of energy behind this campaign to get out the D vote. Also, you have Republicans for Harris who are having campaign events as well, and they hope the independents will come over. So far, it looks like they do have an advantage with independents.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your reporting and for, again, always answering my emails when I have to ask what's going on there.
Sure thing. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to battleground Georgia, where early voting numbers have shattered previous records for the state. Joining me now is Tia Mitchell. She's a Washington correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thank you so much for being here. I know you're someone who's, of course, an expert when it comes to the state of Georgia. So more than 4 million people have voted early in Georgia, more than half the total number of total voters in the state. Why are so many people this year voting early compared to previous election cycles, Tia?
Well, I think, for months now, Georgia voters have been bombarded with the messaging that this is a crucial battleground state and every vote will count. Everyone knows that in 2020, it was fewer than 12,000 votes that decided Joe Biden's victory in Georgia. So I think that message has sunk in, and Georgia voters know that what they say at the polls will have impact and that every vote will matter. And I think they responded in kind. I think also the huge turnout with early voting, some of it has to do with the fact that Republicans have changed their tune a little bit. And whereas before they looked down upon early voting, particularly voting by mail, but early voting in general, Republicans and Democrats both were encouraging their voters to go make a plan, vote early, and the voters responded.
It was really interesting that you mentioned that, because there are some voters, I was out when I was canvassing with people, Republicans, saying, are you sure you want me to vote early? I thought I didn't really trust it. So it's interesting to hear that now Republican voters are actually following that advice. Now, you also talked about the fact that, of course, with this early vote, both sides are really trying to say this is benefiting us. I've talked to Harris aides, some Trump folks saying this is helping us. What do you think of that, especially when you think of Democrats pointing to the record high turnout from black voters in particular, especially given the fact that Donald Trump has been going after black men in this really interesting way?
Yeah, Democrats are pointing to two things. Number one, the record turnout and with black voters doing well. Also with women outpacing male voters in early voting. But I think it's hard to read into that because there really is no comparison to this year. We know 4 years ago, we were at the height of the pandemic and voting just looked a lot different last cycle. And then if you go back even further than that, just, early voting has really shifted a lot in the past 8 years, becoming much more popular. So, we got to wait to see if men catch up on election day. We got to wait to see if white voters start, catching up and making the percentage of Black voters go down in Georgia on election day. We just don't know what election day turnout will look like and how that will affect some of the more robust early voting we're seeing. Democrats believe that some of the more conservative counties in Georgia that had great early voting turnout, that they've exhausted their voters and won't see as robust turnout on election day. But again, we won't know if that will bear out or not.
Yeah, well, definitely we're going to be watching Georgia very closely. And of course, we're going to have you on speed dial, Tia, to break that all down. So thank you so much. And we're now going to go to Governor Tim Walz, who's speaking in Flagstaff, Arizona. Take a listen.
So dangerous. I saw a clip they got of him when he was golfing, and it showed his phone, the lock screen where we have our dogs or our kids or whatever. Not that guy. He's got a picture of himself on his lock screen. It's a true story. I'll tell you something about that. Now, I get it. This is stressful times. Trust me, I know this. We've been through a lot. You're seeing the ads. You see the misinformation, the Russians, the Chinese, and all of this. And you're wondering, and people are stressed out about it. They're stressed. They're wondering what's going to happen. But here's the deal. There's a remedy to that. Go vote for Kamala Harris for president. Go vote.